I just finished reading Wind and Truth, the fifth and sort of final book in Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive series. I listened to the audiobook narrated by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, and this was a 60-hour audiobook. I wanted to like this book so much. I was so excited going into it. I had such high expectations. I loved the first two books in the series. I really enjoyed the second two still, and I wanted to like this one so much. And there were things about it that I did really like, and there were a lot of things that just drove me crazy. So I am going to talk about all those things now. If you have 60 hours of your life you want to dedicate to this book, go listen to that or read it and come back to hear my opinions. So let's start with the things that I really did enjoy about this book. I really liked Kaladin here. He was an amazing character in the first book, and he went through phases where he'd be really annoying and then really awesome. And so I was glad that in this book, he was really awesome. I loved his whole journey with Szeth. I loved watching him become a therapist. It was really cool to kind of also watch like Szeth's childhood and see them work together. And Kaladin and Syl just like bantering together. I loved when they were dancing, sword fighting together. That was so cool. I loved Kaladin. It's cool. He kind of wound up being a herald. That'll be fun. So I liked Kaladin and his whole arc. I enjoyed Szeth and his arc. It was weird that he got married in like a footnote at the end to someone he apparently met the day after the book ended. But okay, if it makes him happy, I guess that works. I really liked Szeth's spren and his sword. It was so much fun to watch, and I loved that Kaladin was initially just going to try to help Szeth, but he ended up helping his whole entourage. The other Skybreaker and 12124, I think was the number of the spren, and then the sword who kind of wanted to murder everybody, but in a nice way. They were some of my favorite characters. I loved watching them all interact, and I loved their whole little journey. I also, of course, loved Adolin. He is one of my favorite characters. He's so much fun. I love how like sassy and fashion focused he is, and he's still a really good person, but he manages to have fun and enjoy his life. And it was so much fun to watch him teaching the Emperor battle strategies, and just kind of his whole, like every time he was on the page, I was really excited to see all the battle things that he was getting up to. I loved the way that he bonded with his sword and his armor, and how he basically managed to heal his sword. She's not completely better, but she's definitely way more on the road to recovery. You can't really call her a Deadeye anymore. She's totally fine. And the way he bonded with his armor, I loved that twist at the end where he had told his armor to go off and protect other people, and that's why they were helping the enemy. And then as soon as Adolin said, "Oh yes, I'm going to be in charge, armor come to me," they just completely abandoned the other guy and flew right over to him. That was so cool. I loved the bond he had with them. I loved that all the unoathed, that you don't need to have a bond to the stuff. You can just have a good like working relationship. That was so cool. I loved his like bionic foot thing. As soon as he lost his leg, like it was so cool to watch him like learning and adapting with that. And this whole series is great about like diversity and disabilities, and representing like people with disabilities really like growing as people and learning to work with them, and that it may be challenging and unpleasant, but it doesn't make you any less of a person. It doesn't detract from, like, it changes the way you can do things, but it doesn't take away your ability to do things. And I love that. I loved his whole footless thing, and then his bionic foot, which is basically having a real foot with superpowers, but it was so cool. I loved Renarin and Rlain. I'm a huge fan of romantic subplots. Half the books I read are just romance novels. So the whole thing with Renarin and Rlain, I would happily read a romance novel just about them. They were so wonderful and kind to each other, and I love them as a metaphor for their two different peoples coming together and learning to share all of Roshar and bring joy to the world, and not just fight constantly, but really forge an alliance like we could have all those years ago if it hadn't been destroyed. Wit is one of my favorite characters too. I love seeing all the things that he does. He was in it for just a little bit, like on the edges, but you can tell he's definitely going to be there again. And with the time dilations, I feel like he'll be able to be in other books off-world and still show right back up next time this series picks up. So that will be really cool, and I was always happy to see him. I also really love Lift, and she was here for like one interlude, I think maybe two interludes, but the whole time she was there, she was awesome, and I love her. And I know she already got one little book to herself, but she could really do with another one because she's just fun to watch. moving on to the not so fabulous stuff. Shallan's whole storyline, I've never cared that much about her storyline with the Ghost Bloods. I feel like it's long and tedious and unnecessary. It was sort of interesting that Shallan's mother ended up being a herald, but that didn't really do anything for the plot. It didn't really change anything. It was just like, okay, cool, fun fact. And then it was interesting that at the very end of the book, I'm pretty sure Shallan was pregnant. They made a comment about her like clutching her belly and how she was stranded and it wasn't just her. She had to do this not just for her. So I thought she was pregnant, but I don't know. I buddy read this book with my boyfriend and he didn't notice at all that that happened. So maybe I was just like reading too much into it, but I don't know. It seemed like the kind of thing that would happen. They're setting up the next stuff, and with all the time jumps, they can have weird age things anyway. They already messed that up with Gav a bunch anyway, so who knows what will happen. So the whole main point of this book was supposed to be about Dalinar and Taravangian battling each other. And that was the most annoying part of the book for me. It was interesting to see Dalinar going back in time and learning stuff about history, but it didn't feel climactic. It didn't feel like a final concluding book kind of thing. It was like, oh, this is cool groundwork. Let's sprinkle that in. And we spent most of the book learning like fun facts that weren't really, they didn't feel super relevant and super necessary to the driving force behind the story. And then we were supposed to think that Taravangian was just so smart and so clever. There was the whole thing where he outsmarted Yasna in this battle of wits. But he didn't outsmart her. He just knew that she had hired an assassin to kill one of her allies, and that would make the allies stop following her. That's not some great battle of wits. That's just, I have this piece of information. The person you're allied with isn't that trustworthy. Go about your day. And it was treated as this big revelation, but it just didn't feel like it. And then the whole final conclusion with Dalinar and Taravangian, when they said that Gav was going to be the champion, I was sure that it was a fake out, but it really was. This poor little boy who's already seen both of his parents died in brutal, terrible ways, and he's been like locked in this palace with the Unmade. He's had a horrible, horrible childhood, and now they're going to lock him in a time bubble for 20 years and torture him for no good reason. I was so mad. And like, the Dalinar was able to not kill him before he died, and so now his grandfather is dead and his grandmother's in a coma, and his life is terrible for no good reason. They just keep torturing this poor kid, and it's awful. And the whole conclusion, like, it was fine, it worked out, but like Dalinar killing his friend wasn't even that original. We'd already seen it happen a few chapters earlier, that you can break your oaths to avoid strategically break your oaths, not because you're really wanting to break them, but we did that to save this friend's life when she was about to be stabbed. And so Dalinar doing this and like sending Honor off to learn some things is interesting, but it didn't really feel like the climax of a 5-book arc to me. It felt very meh and blah. And now Dalinar is dead, but the Blackthorn, horrible, like all Dalinar's worst traits are still alive and gonna come like haunt people, and that's miserable. And then the world doesn't have Stormlight, so we're gonna have like all these powers that we've just acquired are like gone. It's like almost like we got to a point where everyone was too powerful and it wouldn't be interesting, so we had to just like reset back to nothing, so that in the next arc, I guess people will grow with new powers again. But the whole thing just felt not as satisfying as I wanted it to be. And this whole thing was so drawn out and took so long. It was 60 hours to go over 10 days, and they were 10 excruciatingly detailed days. The whole pacing of the book was just weird, and it took me 4 months to read this book. It shouldn't have taken that long, and it was only partly because I was buddy reading it. I'd get stuck, and then we'd be like, okay, no, I'd hear that my boyfriend had read more, so I would read more too to try to catch up. And if it wasn't for that, it would have taken me so much longer. I just didn't have like drive and motivation and joy in reading this book, and I really wanted to. And I'll probably keep reading everything that comes out. I know there's a bunch of Ghost Blood books planned, which I don't even like the Ghost Bloods, but I'll probably give at least one of them a try. And eventually, there'll be 5 more books in this series. And I just really hope they get better and really hope the pacing improves. There are so many good little elements. And I know that Brandon Sanderson is beloved. This is my first series of his that I've read, apart from Wheel of Time. And he's supposed to be this just amazing author. And I feel like this wasn't the best representation of that. So I'm going to take a break. Eventually, I'll probably read more Brandon Sanderson and see if that vibes with me more. But this just wasn't as spectacular as I wanted it to be.